All right, bonjour, cultiste. Coming at you, maybe less than favorable circumstances. I'm actually at work, and it's like nuclear winter in here. Very bright, but I think you can kind of see me in this situation. I'm freehanding a lot of stuff, so bear with me in terms of audio quality. And I wanted to do a video, maybe not so quick, about how to maximize mass. Right? We all know mass is a very powerful prayer. I would argue probably number two, right under the divine office, which is of course the official prayer of the church. Um, and the rosary maybe coming in at third. I don't really like ranking it. It's kind of insulting actually, but it's certainly the one prayer that's obligatory on Catholics. You got to do it every Sunday. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of the customs and the rituals and the prayers at Mass were put together for a reason, and were noticed after they were put together by supreme pontiffs and by the clergy and enriched. So a lot of the things that we do are actually eligible for indulgences of various types, plenary, a lot of partials, and if you do it right and you make sure to express your intention to gain the indulgences, you can gain, I don't know, 100 and something years of indulgence just by going to Mass and doing it right. So you think, well, what goes into Mass, right? And let's just start from scratch, right? You get to church, you walk in, you probably make the sign of the cross with some holy water, walk to the pew, genuflect, get in, and get ready, right? Well, that's where it begins. If we start at Raccolta 678, I believe. Yes, 678. It reads as follows: The faithful, as often as they devoutly sign themselves with the sign of the cross, with the invocation of the Most Holy Trinity, gain an indulgence of 3 years. However, if you do the same holy sign with blessed water, you get 7 years. So that sign of the cross in and of itself gets a 3-year indulgence, and then if you add the holy water, you get 7. Now, what do you do next? Probably, and I'm going to make some suggestions on how to improve your church going experience, but make the sign of the cross. Some people will do a little genuflection as they enter into the aisle, but certainly at the pew before you get in, you would do it. And that too is an indulgenced practice. If we look at 146, Raccolta 146, it reads as follows: The faithful who pay the homage of a due genuflection before the blessed sacrament reserved in the tabernacle, at the same time reciting the following or similar invocation: Jesus, my God, I adore thee, present in the sacrament of thy love, get an indulgence of 300 days. So, I often will replace that with Dominus Meus et Deus Meus. There's a lot of different options. Any sort of similarly devout invocation, specifically it should reference the Blessed Sacrament, makes that genuflection eligible for an indulgence. It gets better though, and most traditional Catholics know this, maybe less so the vernacular services, but if the Blessed Sacrament is exposed or it's an adoration hour, you should genuflect on both knees. That too, under the same number, 146, is indulgenced. And it reads as follows. This is 146 Bravo. If they duly genuflect on both knees before the Blessed Sacrament solemnly exposed to the adoration of the faithful, reciting the above-mentioned prayer or one like it, you get an indulgence of 500 days. Okay? Now, it's interesting. There's a little add-on here. As part Charlie, 146 Charlie, it says, if the faithful make some outward sign of reverence when passing a church or oratory where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved, you get an indulgence of 300 days. So a lot of times you'll notice older Catholics will always make a sign of the cross as they drive by a church or anything like that. And it's a good practice to get into, because if the Blessed Sacrament is in there, even in the tabernacle, as we are, I think we can reasonably assume in many cases, you get an indulgence of 300 days. So we've already gotten, 8 years or more of indulgence. But I want to make a little suggestion, because if we look at Raccolta 147, it reads, "The faithful who upon entering a church proceed at once to the altar of the Blessed Sacrament and make even a brief adoration there may gain an indulgence of 300 days." So I've seen a few Central European people do this. They walk in, they go right to the altar, V-line right to the altar, make a little bow or some act of adoration, and then go back to the pew, do another genuflection, get in and get ready for Mass. And I always admired that, but I didn't understand it was an actual enriched devotion. So that's what I would suggest we all do now. We walk in, sign of the cross with holy water, V-line to the altar, act of adoration, and then go about business as normal, right? Go to the pew, genuflect again as appropriate, get ready, go into Mass. The Mass, going to Mass itself is an indulgenced devotion. So if we look at, excuse me, if we, excuse me, I was looking at the wrong one. That's for new Masses for priests. And you might know that the first time a priest celebrates Mass, you can be eligible for a plenary indulgence. I'll get into that some other time. So we're at the pew now, and the order of the prayers in Mass itself is put together for a reason, was noticed, and later enriched for a reason. And a lot of the common prayers we say are indulgence, right? So the Confiteor, if we look at Raccolta 691, let me just find it here. Faithful who, conscious of their sins with a truly contrite heart, sincerely acknowledge themselves to be sinners before God and confessing their guilt by this humble confession, i.e. the Confiteor, recommend themselves to the prayers of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the whole heavenly court with all earnestness, and are granted an indulgence of 300 days, okay? And if you do that before communion, as you're doing at Mass, presumably, the 300 days gets upgraded to 500 days. I usually don't do the Confiteor with the priests and the deacons or servers before the introit. I kind of, in my mind, that's for them. And then when it comes to the canon, that's when I do my Confiteor. But anytime you do it before confession or before communion, you get the 500-day upgraded indulgence. So something just to be aware of, we're going through the introit, you get to the epistle or the lesson, and then of course it goes into a gradual if you're at a solemn high Mass, and it's just stated, spoken at a low Mass. You gotta read along, because if we look at Raccolta 686, let me just find that here. It reads as follows: "The faithful who devoutly recite the gradual psalm or the 7 penitential psalms are granted an indulgence of 7 years." Now, do you have to do all of them? Because there's a whole series of gradual psalms. I don't know. I read that as, if you recite the gradual psalm with the priest at Mass, you may be eligible for an indulgence of 7 years. I do it. It's good to pay attention anyway. Read it yourself. Maybe ask your priest his interpretation of that. 686. So we get the gospel next, and a lot of people, I didn't even know this until I started studying my Raccolta. If we look at 692, has 3 parts, and it reads as follows. A, Alpha, the faithful who devoutly and attentively assist at the explanation of the gospel on Sundays and the more solemn feasts, as given during Mass, are granted an indulgence of 7 years. So what does that mean? Assist with the explanation of the gospel. Obviously, in the traditional form, we don't have gospel readers. I'm not sure if the priest or if a minister reads the gospel in the ordinary form. Anyway, we don't do it in the Tridentine form. So so what does that mean? Assist at Mass with the explanation of the gospel. I read that as pay attention, follow along, use it to enrich my understanding of doctrine. Am I right? I think so. Now, moreover, if you assist with the explanation of the gospel on Sundays and more solemn feasts at Mass, in theory, it's much like teaching your kids the catechism. You remember the indulgence associated with the teaching or study or teaching of Christian doctrine. It's almost verbatim. It says a plenary indulgence is given twice a month if you assist at the explanation of gospel at Mass. You can get a plenary indulgence twice a month if you're present at such an instruction at least twice a month, and moreover, go to confession, receive Holy Communion, pray for the intentions of the Sovereign Pontiff. So the normal terms and conditions. Now, the way I read that, if you go to, say, 2 consecutive Sunday Masses and you are present at the instruction of the gospel both times, you're eligible for a plenary indulgence. Normal terms and conditions apply. And because there's basically 4 weeks in a month, you could do, if you go to Mass every Sunday, as you have to, and attentively listen to the gospel 2 times, and that 4 times in that month, you can apply 2 and 2 to 2 potential plenary indulgences. Just familiarize yourself with the conditions that you have to fulfill to make that happen. Raccolta 692 goes on in section B, Bravo, and I really like this one. As often as you hear a sermon attentively and devoutly, you are granted an indulgence of 5 years. So you pay attention during the sermon, you get an indulgence for 5 years. Love it. You get some upgrades during certain times of the year and under certain activities, right? So part Charlie C reads as follows: those who devoutly attend the sermons delivered in Lent, in Advent, and during a mission are granted an indulgence for 7 years, and a plenary indulgence, usual conditions, if you hear at least a third of these same sermons in a spirit of devotion. I love the wording there, right? So listen, if you can pay attention for at least 30% of the sermons during Lent or Advent or on a mission, you get a plenary indulgence if you do the normal conditions. So what's the upshot? Pay attention, right? Pay attention during the gospel reading, pay attention during the sermon, and you're racking up indulgences. So what comes next? We got the Creed. The Creed itself, both the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed are enriched. If we look at Raccolta 44, here, let me just find it. The faithful who during the sacrifice of the Mass devoutly recite the Nicene Creed in union with the celebrant are granted an indulgence of 7 years. So make sure to sing along if you're at a solemn high Mass. I notice a lot of people, at least in some of the parishes I go to, they don't sing along with the Creed. I always do. It's a beautiful prayer. It's a beautiful tune. Creed 1, Creed 2, Creed 3, they're all quite beautiful, and it's enriched too. So don't just sit there. Make sure you're singing along. Now, the Apostles' Creed, which I don't think is ever used at Mass. It might be for, certain kind of obscure low Mass situations. I can't really remember right now, but it's enriched too, and it doesn't have to be in the context of Mass. So if you just say the, Apostles' Creed, for instance, at the end of a rosary, or just you say it as part of your morning prayers, you get an indulgence of 5 years. And you're eligible for a plenary indulgence if you do that every day for a month in a spirit of devotion, which I presume a lot of people are doing. So keep that in mind. So we get the Creed, and then we get the Sanctus, and that is enriched as well. So make sure you say it. I was not in the habit of saying the Sanctus as the priest did after the preface, just because I found it so scary, but I do now because I know it's enriched. So if you say the Sanctus, 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 Dominus Deus Saba, Ot pleni sunt caeli et terra gloria tua, has to be that version. You get an indulgence of 500 days and a plenary indulgence if you say it every day for a month. So if you go to daily Mass for a month and you make sure to say the Sanctus, you're going to be eligible for a plenary, normal terms and conditions. I think. Yep, usual conditions. And after the Sanctus, you get the Benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini. That too is enriched. If we look at Raccolta 139, I think I read it right. Bear with me here. Yep, Benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini, Hosanna in excelsis. You recite this prayer after the consecration in the Mass. So, Sanctus, you do the whole consecration thing, then say Benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini, Hosanna in excelsis. You get an indulgence of 500 days and a plenary indulgence once a month on the usual conditions if you do so daily. So there's a lot of opportunities if you go to daily Mass to rack up plenary indulgences. So I kind of skipped around. That specifically has to be after the consecration, but there are two important things you can do during the consecration, right? So if we look at Raccolta 133 and 142, 133 reads, "The faithful who, at the elevation of the sacred host during Mass, or when it is solemnly exposed, recite the invocation with faith, piety, and love, are granted an indulgence of 7 years." And the invocation is in Latin, Dominus meus et Deus meus. So at the elevation, Dominus Deus et Deus meus, immediate 7-year indulgence, and potentially a plenary indulgence once a week if you do this daily, normal terms and conditions. Okay, so if you're in the habit of going to daily Mass, just, even for 1 week, doesn't have to be a month like the Sanctus or the Benedictus. And at the elevation, Dominus meus et Deus meus, plenary indulgence under the normal conditions. There's also a really lovely one at the ringing of the bells. So if we look at Raccolta 142, "The faithful who recite some prayer at the sound of the bell for the elevation at Mass, wherever they may be, are granted an indulgence of 300 days. So this is great because you don't even really have to be at Mass. Some churches, certainly my parish does, at the elevation during the consecration, we ring the big bells in the tower, which can be heard for city blocks, And if you hear it, right, at the sound of that bell for the elevation at Mass, wherever you are, you say anything you want as long as it's devout. I usually go to the Dominus meus et Deus meus. 300-day indulgence. Okay, no opportunity for a plenary there. But it's easy. You're driving through town, you hear the bells, you might as well say a prayer anyway, because if it happens to be in recognition of the elevation, you're going to get the indulgence. And if it isn't, hey, it's still a devout practice. So that, of course, leads us to communion itself. And there are so many options, both before reception and after reception, for all sorts of indulgences. I can't really go through them all. But grab your Raccolta, look at 153 and following. This gives you half a dozen ideas for pre-reception prayers that are enriched. And if you look at 159 and following, that'll give you many ideas for prayers and devotions after receiving communion that are enriched, and that in a bunch of different configurations. So you can choose which ones you like, how much indulgence you think you need, and bear that in mind. It's also worth pointing out Raccolta 131, which I really like. This is kind of my go-to post-communion indulgenced prayer, enriched prayer. It's the Anima Christi. It's a beautiful, beautiful prayer, and it has the kicker of turning into a plenary indulgence once a month if you do it every day. So if you receive communion every day for a month, then you say the Anima Christi afterwards each and every time, fulfill the rest of the conditions for the plenary. Once a month, you can get this plenary. And I do hope that I'm getting it when I fulfill those criteria. So what's the upshot here? I guess the upshot is be mindful when you're going to Mass and when you're at Mass, and of all of the opportunities to remove the temporal punishment for sin. You know, I think a lot of people, unfortunately, maybe less than you would expect, but a lot of people go to Mass just because it's rote and it's what they do. I think a lot of people do go there in a spirit of devotion and really wanting to participate and assist and reverence, but they don't really understand all the opportunities with little. I mean, these are easy. These are not, 9-day complicated novenas. These are very simple practices and prayers that you're probably already doing. You just need to express the intention to gain the indulgence. And, you might want to tweak them a little bit here and there to make sure you're making yourself eligible. But, just those, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, at least 13 opportunities that we just went over to get indulgences, anywhere from 300 days to 7 years to plenary. I mean, probably 5 opportunities for plenary indulgence by going to Mass, right? In a spirit of devotion and frequently. Okay, thank you. I apologize for the rush here. I got to get back to work, but thank you, cultists, and pay attention because I'm coming out with a bunch of good ones soon. And God save the church.